Cheating on me? Get HIV then. This is not my story. I just saw this on Facebook and though this might fits here. So this story belongs to a Chinese man. I just translated. English is not my first language so please be kind to me. I'll put the Facebook link down below in the comment section. I've suffered for at least 6 months. Finally I can push her into the darkest pit of hell. It's a long story, so let me light up a cigarette and tell you all about it. I met my girlfriend when we were on a same vacation tour back in 2006. The first time our eyes met, I've made a promise to myself that I have to make her my girlfriend. The process wasn't hard by any mean. I just poured my truest, deepest love out to her, to make her moved by my true feelings. I loved her. I truly, really loved her. But due to my job, I had to travel a lot. Sometimes I would be away from home for 15 days to a month. About 6 months ago, I noticed she had been showing signs of a cheater. She's always tried to hide away from me when she was on her phone, either if she was texting or calling someone. I'd just lay my eyes on her phone and she would turn it off. I can almost confirm that she was cheating but I didn't have any kind of evidence. I have an email account that had been logged in for a good while but rarely use, and then one day there were hotel bills sent to this email. I checked the emails and some other things and found out there were some note lines about the bills. After that there was nothing left to clarify. But one man's soul can't truly die when he haven't dead. Me and some friends had found out about the man she had been freaking with and the hotel's location. The first thing I felt when her cheating on me was confirmed was anger. I was furious, not a bit of heartbreaking. It is the feeling when you wanted someone to die, gone, disappeared. I wanted her to suffer and die. So reality has proved that money can solve anything. I found the way to contact the other man, his WeChat. It's like Facebook for Chinese, to be exact. I have friends that really talented, smart people, if I could tell. I made friend with a doctor back in August last year. I told him my story and what was my plan, also sprinkled in a bit of you can have benefit out of this too. Of course I'll pay the money. He made up his mind for a few days and then gave me contacts of some female patients that have HIV. There was no mention about the strict policy in the hospital about patients' privacy. Out of 3 patients I've met, only 1 agree. Most of the ones who have HIV haven't had a clean life. When you have the money, you really can control the devil himself. I gave her the other man's contact and an amount of fee, and required her in the shortest time she could give him HIV. This modern life make it really easy for a woman to sleep with a man. It only took her 5 days. I worried that only one night wasn't enough for him to have HIV, so I asked her to be his FWB for a while, and gave her 15,000 yuan, tilde use 2150. My girlfriend still haven't known anything. She did really fall for him. I knew it since reading her texts. About 2 weeks before Tet, she had a fever. A terrible, agonizing fever. I knew she already had HIV. We did had intercourse but I had my rubber on. I told her to go to the hospital but due to my job, I had to be away for several days so I couldn't cut it to the hospital with her. I would pay a fortune to see her face when she found out about the HIV though. After 2 days I went home and saw her being upset and all, and then after asking my friend at the hospital, it is confirmed that she has HIV. I was ecstatic, but I played it cool. I was the dumb boyfriend that haven't know anything. She didn't know that I already got the info about her HIV. We're still being together for now. I want to witness with my own eyes her being slowly dying on the hospital bed. That's all. If there's anything happened I'll tell you later. Creep kills my duck, so I ruin his life. So, here is my story. Back in May of 1990, there was an unseasonably late snowstorm. A few days after it snowed, I was riding my bike, and found a baby duckling all by itself near a river. There was no mother duck around, so I put it inside my shirt to keep it warm and brought it home on my bike. My mother thought it would die because it was so small and cold and wet and shivering, but I put it under a light, and after a while it dried off and started hopping around and peeping. It was so cute, it followed me like a puppy. I called it Philip, because it sounded like it was saying Philip, Philip, Philip whenever it peeped. So, after a few weeks, I figured I ought to teach it to swim and eat stuff in the lakes, so I started bringing it to a small local beach. Philip did well, he swam around and ate zazas and snails and everyone at the beach loved him. Now my trouble started. After I had brought Philip to the beach several times, the lifeguard told me that his boss, the director of Parks and Recreation, who will be known as Stuffed Shirt, had told him that there was a city ordinance against bringing pets to city parks. I tried to explain to the lifeguard that it was only for a few weeks, and then the duck would be grown up and able to live on its own, but he didn't care. I was upset. How was I going to teach the duck to live on its own? I went to the library and got out the large blue books of city ordinances and looked up the relative ordinance, and discovered something interesting. There was one ordinance that prohibited bringing dogs into city parks, and another that prohibited bringing horses into city parks, both of which I see happening fairly often, BTW. But no ordinance against bringing ducks into city parks. So, I went home and called Stuffed Shirt. However, it being a weekend, he wasn't in, so his secretary answered the phone. I told her what had happened and what the ordinances actually said, and told her to tell Stuffed Shirt that I would be bringing my duck to the beach anytime I felt like it. Well, apparently when Stuffed Shirt heard this, his head exploded. He called me back and told me that he had had a conference with the city attorney about my duck, and according to him, the city attorney had decided that the law should be interpreted to refer to all domestic or pet animals, not merely dogs or horses. Then he said he had called the DNR, because I was not supposed to have a duck. Now, please note the following at this point. Attorneys are not privileged to interpret the law. Only judges are supposed to do that. And the law was not ambiguous such that it required interpretation. One specifically said dogs, the other specifically said horses. Note that at this point, my duck was referred to as a domestic animal. Anyway, a few days later the DNR agent shows up at my house, and marches right into my backyard, without ringing the doorbell, and without a warrant. We will call him Butt Buddy, because I suspect that was his relation to Stuffed Shirt, as he wasn't even from my city. Stuffed Shirt had gotten him to come over from another city. I was in my backyard at the time feeding Philip, my duck, and Butt Buddy proceeds to read me the riot act. First he tells me that my duck was a wood duck, which is a wild animal, after Stuffed Shirt had previously referred to it as a domestic animal. And this was a lie, BTW, I learned later my duck was a mallard, which can be considered either wild or domestic, depending on the circumstances. Then he tells me that I can't have a wood duck, which my duck wasn't, without a game farm license, and that I couldn't get a game farm license unless I had 40 acres of land. He then told me that I either had to let my duck go by the end of the day, or he would confiscate it and take it to a lake in another town, where I would never see it again. I told him my duck was too little to let go, and I was going to let it go in a month, but he wouldn't hear it. He told me I had to do as I told him. I was crying as I let my poor little duckling Philip go on the lake. I went back that evening to check on him, and he was cowering, terrified, under a boardwalk. The next day, I couldn't find him at all. He probably got eaten by something because he was way too little to let go. Then, would you believe, the next week, Butt Buddy the game warden, came back onto my property, without permission, again, to make sure the duck was not still there. Now, on to the revenge part. After losing my duck, I went to the library and spent hours looking up the laws about wildlife and game farms, and I found out something very interesting. Butt Buddy the game warden had lied to me. As it turned out, you only needed 40 acres of land to get a game farm license on land where hunting, trapping, or killing of animals was going on. Otherwise there was no land requirement to get a game farm license, only a pen size requirement, which my pen for my duckling more than met. If I was devastated and crying my eyes out before, now I was so furious that my head was exploding. They killed my duck not because it was the law, but just for an ego trip. So I got even. I was the town eccentric, so I didn't have any reputation to lose, and didn't care what people thought of me. I spent the next several weeks walking around downtown and telling everyone who would stop and listen about my duck, and how Stuffed Shirt and Butt Buddy had lied to me and made me condemn my own pet to death. Maybe people thought I was nuts, but I didn't care. Everyone was finding out what happened, and Stuffed Shirt was scared. I had a friend from work who also worked part-time in his office, and she told me he was so frightened that he had gone to a lawyer to try to pursue a slander charge against me, to get to stop telling people what had happened. Only the lawyer told him there was absolutely nothing that could be done, because truth was an absolute defense against slander. And if he didn't like the truth, whose fault was that? Stuffed Shirt's critical mistake, of course, was actually filing a complaint with the DNR so that he could get Butt Buddy game warden to legitimately intimidate me into releasing my baby duckling way too soon. The DNR, like all government agencies, keeps records. If he tried to claim I was lying and slandering him, there was documented proof of what had happened. So the outcome? Stuffed Shirt lost his cushy city bureaucrat job as the director of Parks and Recreation, and the last I heard of him, about 10 years after this happened, had lost 2 other jobs. His house, he couldn't make the payments when he had no job, his wife, who didn't want to stick around when he had no job, and was somewhere in a trailer park, drinking himself to death. I hope he did, too. Fire me for speaking up? Enjoy going out of business. Many years ago, I worked at an automotive repair shop that was owned by a very nasty person. This person actually had 2 shops that he ran, and the best way I can describe him was as a tyrant. Both shops had cameras, and he would watch us work from the comfort of his home. If he saw something he didn't like, such as taking a 5-minute smoke break, or not sweeping for half a minute during downtime, or if he just wanted to bust balls, he would call the shop and harass us. Or better yet, at times, show up and harass us in person. In addition, he would regularly berate us for no reason, threaten to not pay us because the shops weren't busy, and would have an absolute meltdown if you dared question his authority. It was spectacular, in the worst of ways. After working for him for a few months, and dealing with his shenanigans, and getting sick of pointless arguments with him, I started reconsidering my employment there. Around the same time, the owner decided to move me from one shop to the other, really for no reason other than likely to try push me out, as that was what he did with the few people that I had already worked with. Odd coincidence being that I had not discussed my thoughts of leaving with anyone, but I digress. I genuinely disliked the idea of working at this other shop. It was older and a bit run down, plus it was in a pretty terrible area with high crime. But I wanted to line something up elsewhere before I jumped ship, so I made the move. This is where the beginning of the end started for old Mr. Owner. Once I got settled into the new shop, I got to talking with my fellow technicians. As it turns out, the owner was unsurprisingly a racist scumbag, and every single one of the employees at this location, aside from me, was African American. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a miracle that the owner came into the shop, said what he said, and walked out breathing. In addition, he would regularly send people home with no pay for the day just to be an ass. This went on for a few weeks, him coming by, being nasty to all of us, and I was over it, and was just about to leave as I had lined up other employment. The other techs were also over it. I went to give the owner my 2-week notice via phone, discreetly, which I should have known wasn't a great idea, and instead of discussing it like a human, he decided to come down and talk face to face. Well, our friend was so incensed that I put my notice in that he forced me to clock out and go home, and also forced 2 other techs who decided to stand up for me to do the same. I decided that I had enough of this guy's shit, and that not only did he deserve to have some kind of reciprocation against him, but the other techs deserved better than to continually being walked on. So I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor, and outlined everything. Within a few days they had launched an investigation, and of course the owner found out who filed the complaint and called the shop, and gave me hell about it, stupidly, because the phones he had were on recorded lines. Guess who I had request to listen to that conversation? In the end, I was terminated by him prior to my 2 weeks being up, as were the 2 techs who stood behind me. I filed for unemployment, which he fought me on by filing appeals with a judge, then not showing up 3 times in a row. This prompted the judge to bar him from requesting appeals against me, and granting me full unemployment pay. Months later I got a written letter from him extending an apology and offer to work for him again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the Dole saying that the investigation was closed, and that he had been found guilty of multiple charges and was barred from operating a shop or any other business in the state for several years.